fell out the window upstairs on the second floor.
Okay, are you there
And
with
she
her?
laying on the ground, butt naked.
Are you with her right now?
I'm right here right now. She laying on the ground, butt naked.
The woman discovered here was just one of many who either went missing or endured horrific abuse at the hands of the man who lived in this house. After 2 years, the decomposing remains of 11 women were found inside, shocking neighbors who realized that the awful smell lingering in the air wasn't from a nearby sausage factory, but from this very home. It became known as the true House of Horrors. This case was so disturbing that even after his acquittal, many still believed the so-called Cleveland Strangler had more than 11 victims, as several other murders in the area remain unsolved to this day. One thing that always angers me is how these women were left to roam the streets. Today we remember them because no troubled past can ever justify what they went through. Once you hear the full story, you'll understand exactly why. The man at the center of this nightmare was Anthony Sowell. In a chilling video, he casually described how he killed his victims. Like many serial killers, he had a troubled past that shaped his twisted view of women, seeing them as objects to torture, harass, and kill. Anthony was one of 7 children born to Claudia Garrison, a single mother struggling to raise them all. Tragedy struck when one of Claudia's daughters, Anthony's sister, passed away, leaving behind 7 children of her own. With nowhere else to go, they moved in with Claudia, bringing the total number of kids in the household to 14. According to Anthony's niece, Leona, their time in that house was pure misery. Claudia subjected them to brutal beatings and relentless abuse, while her own children watched. Leona recalled how Claudia, the very woman who was supposed to protect her, forced her to strip naked and then brutally beat her. Leona later recounted, "She would tie us up to the pole, strip us naked, and beat us." Tragically, it didn't stop there. Other male relatives living in the house joined in, creating a cycle of unspeakable violence. Leona noted that Anthony often remained silent during these horrific acts, watching as the abuse unfolded. For him, witnessing mistreatment became almost normal. At just 11 years old, he started molesting his own 10-year-old niece, perpetuating the cycle of pain ingrained in their home. Fast forward to January 24, 1978, when Anthony joined the United States Marine Corps. Surprisingly, he excelled in the military, earning multiple Good Conduct medals and certificates. Upon his honorable discharge in 1985, Anthony returned home to Cleveland, where he managed to live a relatively normal life for a while. However, that facade crumbled in 1989, when he committed his first known violent crime. It all began with Millette Stockwell, a 3-month pregnant woman who believed she was simply meeting a new client. That fateful night, she accompanied Anthony to his home, expecting a routine exchange. But as soon as they stepped inside, his demeanor shifted. He became aggressive, tying her hands and feet with zip ties and gagging her with a rag to keep her from screaming. In a moment of sheer desperation, she managed to break free, escape through a window, and signal for help from a rooftop. A neighbor spotted her and called the police. When officers arrived, they found her terrified, but miraculously alive. Anthony was arrested and charged with rape, attempted rape, and kidnapping. By then, 3 women from the same street as Anthony had already been murdered, and he was on the authorities' radar. Despite the charges against him, he pleaded guilty to rape and was sentenced to only 5 to 15 years in prison. While behind bars, Anthony underwent multiple psychological evaluations, yet he continuously insisted he would never commit such acts again. Chillingly, he was not classified as a sex offender, meaning that when he was released in 2005, he was free to roam the streets of Cleveland like any other citizen. That same year, he moved into 12,225 Imperial Avenue, a house that would soon become infamous. However, 2 years later, Anthony lost his job at a local factory under mysterious circumstances. Unemployed, he began collecting benefits and making money on the side as a scrap metal collector. As his financial situation deteriorated, so did his mental state. He became more withdrawn, spending most of his time in his house, avoiding neighbors, and exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. Then came the turning point. Anthony began a relationship with a woman named Lori, a niece of the governor in Cleveland. Their relationship quickly spiraled into a toxic cycle of heavy drug use. But while Anthony sank deeper into addiction, Lori wanted out. In 2007, when Anthony was fired from his job, Lori saw her chance to break free and left him. The heartbreak shattered something inside him, sending him into a dark spiral. He remained on Imperial Avenue, but from that moment on, his reclusive tendencies became even more pronounced. That same year, a 10-year-old girl living nearby vanished without a trace. Just months later, another woman, a 33-year-old nursing assistant named Tashana Culver, disappeared. Tashana had struggled with drug addiction, but was also a dedicated healthcare worker trying to turn her life around. No one reported her missing, no police alerts, no flyers, just another woman gone. 2 months later, 25-year-old Leanne DeLong, a mother of 3, also vanished. Then, in October 2008, 45-year-old Michelle Mason, who had 2 sons and was a devoted volunteer for the local AIDS task force, was reported missing. Her mother, terrified, went to the police in early December, begging them to look into her daughter's disappearance. But nothing happened. Meanwhile, over on Imperial Avenue, a gut-wrenching stench was growing worse by the day. The entire neighborhood complained about a smell so rancid it made people gag just walking past. The most disturbing part? Anthony Sowell himself was aware of it. Whenever someone questioned the putrid odor, he had a ready excuse. "It's that damn sausage factory next door," he'd say, and somehow people believed him. By this time, Anthony was unraveling. In early December 2008, a terrified woman ran straight to a police car parked in the neighborhood, bleeding, shaking, and screaming. She claimed Anthony had attacked her, dragged her inside his house, choked her, and attempted to assault her. When police stormed Anthony's foul-smelling home and arrested him, he insisted that she was the criminal. With no clear evidence, both were arrested, but later released due to insufficient proof. Just a month later, in January 2009, Kim Smith, a 44-year-old woman who had been caring for her elderly father, disappeared. That year alone, 5 more women, Nancy Cobbs, Imelda Hunter, Janice Webb, Talisha Fortson, and Diane Turner, vanished without a trace. The alarming number of missing women in such a small area didn't go unnoticed by the community. Residents began organizing searches, handing out flyers, and trying to bring attention to the disappearances. Shockingly, Anthony himself joined these efforts, blending in with those desperately searching for the very women he had taken. Then came October 2009. A woman named Shawn Morris visited Anthony's house, seemingly unfazed by the overpowering stench. The two spent the evening drinking and talking. The next morning, as she prepared to leave, she realized she had left her ID upstairs. As she walked up to retrieve it, she suddenly heard a chilling click sound from behind her. Before she could react, Anthony lunged at her, attacking her without warning. He overpowered her, assaulted her, and then locked all the doors and windows. It became clear he had no intention of letting her go. But Shawn saw a fleeting moment of opportunity, one she knew she had to take. Summoning all her strength, she threw herself out of a 3rd-story window, crashing 30 feet to the ground below. Anthony, realizing what had happened, bolted downstairs, completely unclothed, desperate to drag her back inside. But this time, fate wasn't on his side. 2 passers-by witnessed the horrifying scene and immediately called 911. Thanks to them, Shawn was rushed to the hospital with severe injuries. Despite the brutal attack, she chose not to speak to the police about what had happened. However, someone else would. Just a week later, on October 27th, a woman named Latundra Bips came forward to share her own horrifying experience with Anthony Sowell. She had endured a terrifying ordeal back in September, one that followed the same pattern as before. Unlike so many others, she was lucky enough to survive, but the trauma kept her silent until now. Finally, in late October, her testimony was enough for authorities to issue both an arrest warrant and a search warrant for Anthony Sowell. On October 29th, SWAT officers stormed his house, expecting to take Anthony into custody. But what they found was far worse than they could have imagined. Anthony wasn't home, but the stench was overwhelming. Dead flies covered every surface, and then came the grisly discoveries. Decomposing bodies, one after another, some of which had been rotting away for years. The house of horrors that had plagued the neighborhood for so long was finally exposed, and a manhunt was immediately launched for Anthony Sowell. For 2 days, police scoured the city for him. Then, on October 31st, as he casually strolled down the street, officers spotted him. They pulled over and cuffed him on the spot. He looked disheveled, as if he had been hiding in the bushes for days. But there was no hiding from what had been found in his home. What happened in this house is simply a nightmare, and there are many deeply disturbing questions for authorities. 6 bodies were found in this house last week, and this morning we learned there are more. We discovered 4 additional bodies, and it appears this man had an insatiable appetite that he had to feed. To shed light on Anthony's victims, let's get to know them before their lives were consumed by addiction. They all had stories, dreams, and struggles. They had every reason to keep going, and there was no reason for them to be murdered. Crystal Dossier, a mother of 7, was 35 years old when she vanished in May 2007. Her son, a U.S. Marine, desperately searched for her, but she wouldn't be found until police unearthed her remains in Anthony's backyard 2 years later. Loved ones recalled that Crystal had turned to drugs after losing one of her children, a pain that consumed her. Despite her struggles, she was a devoted mother who could have had a different ending. Tashana Culver was 33 years old, a trained nursing assistant and cosmetologist who once envisioned a future helping others. However, tragedy struck when her boyfriend took his own life, sending her into a spiral of grief and addiction. She disappeared in June 2008, leaving behind loved ones who never stopped wondering what had happened to her. Leanne DeLong, just 25 years old, was the youngest of Anthony's victims. A mother of 3, she disappeared 3 months after Tashana. No one even filed a missing persons report for her, a heartbreaking reflection of how addiction often isolates its victims from the support they need. Her remains were never fully recovered. Only her skull was found in Anthony's basement. Michelle Mason fought hard to turn her life around. At 45, she was living with HIV and had battled heroin addiction, but she refused to let her struggles define her. She disappeared on or around October 4, 2008, another life full of resilience and hope tragically cut short. Tanya Carmichael was a mother, a fighter, and tragically the first victim to be identified from Anthony Sowell's House of Horrors. Though she struggled with substance abuse, her loved ones never stopped caring. When she vanished in December 2008, they knew something was wrong. Tanya's mother reported her missing within a week, desperate for answers. But the police saw just another black woman with a drug problem and failed to take the case seriously. Years later, forensic testimony would expose the brutality of her death, strangled with a telephone charger, discarded as if she didn't matter. But Tanya did matter. She was loved, she was missed, and her family never stopped fighting to ensure she wouldn't be forgotten. Kim Smith, 44, was a caretaker in every sense of the word. She dedicated her life to looking after her ailing father. In January 2009, she disappeared without a trace, leaving her father behind and breaking the hearts of those who knew her. Imelda Amy Hunter, 47, had a life marked by hardships and resilience. Raised in Chicago, she was an avid reader with dreams. But at just 14, she became pregnant by one of her teachers and gave birth to a child with cerebral palsy who was also deaf. This unimaginable responsibility weighed on her young shoulders, and eventually, addiction found its way into her life. Yet she was more than her struggles. She was a mother, a woman who had once been full of promise. Nancy Cobbs was a 44-year-old grandmother, deeply loved and fiercely missed. When she disappeared in April 2009, her family refused to sit idly by. Tragically, her body was discovered months later, wrapped in 6 plastic bags. Forensic testimony later revealed that she had been strangled with a shoelace, another victim of Anthony's cruelty. Tasia Fortson, 31, had a difficult upbringing, bouncing from foster home to foster home. She frequently ran away, searching for something better, but addiction tightened its grip on her. Like Tashana and Amy, no one even realized she was missing until the bodies began surfacing. Janice Webb, 48, was last seen on June 3, 2009, at her boyfriend's home in Lakewood, Ohio, just outside Cleveland. A woman with her own battles, she never imagined that crossing paths with Anthony would be her final chapter. Diane Turner, 38, had endured the unthinkable, losing all 6 of her children to the state. The pain of separation pushed her deeper into addiction, but she was still a mother who had once held hope for her family. She was the last of Anthony's victims to disappear in September 2009, the same month that Latundra Bips, 37, survived his brutal attack. These women were not just victims, they were individuals who lived, loved, and endured unimaginable struggles. Their stories deserve to be told, not just as part of Anthony's crimes, but as a reminder of the lives that were stolen and the justice they finally received. What's particularly gut-wrenching is that by the time authorities finally captured Anthony Sowell, he was 50 years old, meaning he had already spent decades living freely, committing these crimes unnoticed. His arrest on October 29, 2009, was just the beginning of a long, drawn-out legal battle. Sowell's trial was initially scheduled for June 2, 2010, but what followed was a series of postponements. His defense team argued that they needed more time to prepare, review evidence, and analyze hours of surveillance footage. The trial was pushed to September 7th, then to February 14th, then to May 2nd, and finally to June 6, 2011. When proceedings finally began, Sowell faced 85 charges, including 11 counts of aggravated murder and 74 counts of rape, kidnapping, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. His initial plea was not guilty by reason of insanity, but he later changed it to simply not guilty. Despite his attempts to evade responsibility, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Survivors testified, forensic experts detailed the gruesome conditions of his home, and jurors were confronted with horrifying photos of the crime scene. On July 22, 2011, after weeks of testimony, the jury found him guilty on all but 2 counts. The decision was clear. Anthony Sowell was a serial killer who preyed on the most vulnerable women in his community. When I read the jury's verdict, I asked the defendant to please rise. With respect to the matter of the State of Ohio versus Anthony Sowell, criminal case number 530-8-854, we therefore unanimously find that the sentence of death should be imposed upon the defendant, Anthony Sowell. All 12 jurors signed their names to this verdict form. When it came time for sentencing, the prosecution argued that Sowell showed no remorse for his crimes. The jurors agreed. On August 10th, they recommended the death penalty, and 2 days later, Judge Dick Ambrose upheld their decision. Sowell was officially sentenced to death on September 14, 2011, and transferred to death row at Chillicothe Correctional Institution, a stark contrast to the freedom he had once used to terrorize his victims. Sowell and his attorneys spent years filing appeal after appeal, arguing that excessive media coverage, a closed courtroom, and poor legal representation had denied him a fair trial. The Ohio Supreme Court rejected his appeal in December 2016, and when he took the case to the United States Supreme Court in 2017, they declined to hear it. By May 2020, Sowell had exhausted all legal options. Then, before the state could carry out his execution, fate stepped in. On February 8, 2021, at age 61, Sowell died in a prison hospital from an unspecified terminal illness. Some speculated liver failure or cancer, but no official cause was released. He may be gone, but the nightmare he created still lingers, a haunting reminder of how he not only took lives, but lived among the dead, sleeping beside his victims' corpses. The trauma he inflicted didn't just disappear with his death, it still weighs heavily on the community. In 2021, 5 of Sowell's surviving victims bravely shared their stories, exposing the horrors they endured and the failures that allowed it to happen. Here's the harsh reality. Back then, when black women went missing, law enforcement barely lifted a finger. This isn't an isolated case. We've covered multiple cases just like this, including another infamous strangler from Charlotte who also murdered 11 black women. The red flags were everywhere, but officers failed to connect the dots. Was it carelessness, or did they just not care? Eventually, the city of Cleveland had to answer for its failures, paying out $1.3 million in settlements to the families of Sowell's victims. But here's the question: was that justice, or just a price tag for negligence? Now I want to hear from you. Do you think there were more victims than the ones officially linked to him? Considering the unsolved murders of women in that area, could some of those cases be connected to Sowell? Drop your thoughts below. If you want to dive deeper into similar cases, check out our channel. We've got more to uncover. If you like the way we create these videos and want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.